Welcome back to Commander in General, where generally we talk about Commander. Ladies and gentlemen, there's been a murder in the building. Was it an octopus with a knife? Who's to say? With the release of the newest set, Murders at Karlov Manor, comes a bunch of super cool new legends to build around. My personal favorite of them is this little fellow right here. Marvo is a quirked up Octoboy with a mechanic you haven't seen since the release of Spider-Man 3.
This is something else.
That's right, Clash is back, and this time, it's good.
Oh god, it's so good.
But enough hype building, let's take a look at him. Marvo Deep Operative is a 1/8 for 3, a blue, and a black. Whenever Marvo attacks, you clash with a defending player. Now, Clash doesn't really do anything on its own, so let's keep reading. The next part says, whenever we win a clash, we may draw a card, and then we may cast a spell from our hand with CMC 8 or less without paying its mana cost. Keep in mind that number is 8, so if you play anything above 8 CMC in your deck, you will need to really justify playing it. But besides that, wow. Cheating mana cost is one of the most powerful things we can do in Commander, and if you pay close attention, it isn't just whenever Marvo makes us clash, it's whenever we clash at all. This means we're going to want to load up our deck with A, ways to clash, B, ways to control the top card of our deck, and C, huge cards that will not only win us clashes, but that we can cast for free and that will win us the game. And step D, profit, or whatever I can mean. Of course, the pitfalls of this deck are that you want to play a lot of high cost cards, but then they can end up sitting in your hand dead all game. So to smooth out our strategy, we're going to have to play lots of low cost ramp cards to accelerate to our commander and late game as quick as we can. Make sure we have enough tools to control the top card of our deck so that we don't get those dinky ramp cards when we go to clash, and then play some super impactful bombs that will win us clashes and in due time win us the game. So now let's check out some cards that are going to get us there. But before we do, I just wanted to remind you that if you enjoy this deck tech, please leave a like or a comment down below and consider subscribing if you like this content. I'm currently trying to reach 1,000 subs, so it would mean a lot to me if you did that. Now, let's go. For this first category, let's look at another way we can mitigate this whole mana problem, and that's with cards that have alternate mana costs, or multiple ways to cast them. Cards with Suspend are a great example. If they end up on top of our library, they'll help us win those all-important clashes, but if we end up drawing them early, then we can just suspend them for later. Ones that work well in this deck are Charnel Serenade and Watcher of Hours to control our top card and get some creatures back from our graveyard, and Aspiring Refrain to draw us some cards. Also, a little teaser to the sea creatures we'll be taking a look at later. Star Whale fits our theme pretty well, having multiple ways to cast it, plus it's huge, flying, vigilance, and gives all of our creatures ward. Pretty freaking sweet. I'm actually really excited to play this card. I also love whales. I don't know, love octopuses too. Cards with Adventure or Prototype fall into a similar category. We can cast the Adventure side a bit early and cheap from our hand, but in the library they are clash winners, and getting to cast the full card for free is also nice. Ones I would recommend with Marvo are Virtue of Persistence as a little piece of removal and a powerhouse reanimator later on, Hiking Metamorph as a nice little clone with a big body, and Phyrexian Fleshgorger as a hard to block, hard to remove beater later on. Auron's Epiphany doesn't have as low of a low end, but we can foretell it for a later moment for less mana at a time, or once again, it's a good clasher and it's a flashy play if we can cheat it. MDFC spell/lands work well too. They help smooth our mana base, like Seagate Restoration. Cards that have cycling abilities like Decree of Pain, Lorien Revealed, and Shark Typhoon also serve as multi-mode cards that won't lay dead in our hands if we get them too early. Miracle cards can come in clutch off the top, or we can hard cast them later. Ones I'm playing here are Devastation Tide and, of course, Temporal Mastery. With all this drawing and surveying, we're sure to end up with some extra cards in our bin, but should we not need them, another classic way to cheat our mana cost is Delve. We can delve some cards into our hand with Dig Through Time or a nice little Treasure Cruise, and Murderous Cut is a nice little piece of creature removal. I also do want to shout out Temporal Trespass, but keep in mind the mana cost of this card is over 8, so we'll never actually be able to cheat this out with our commander. That might be okay though, it's still a fantastic card and it can still slap someone in a clash, but just something to keep in mind. And this isn't a delve card, but if we end up with 10 or more creatures in our bin, then we can just slap down an Avatar of Will. but watch how you're building your deck. You'll also need to be pretty creature heavy to justify this one. And to wrap up this section, we've got some one-offs that'll save us a little bit of mana. Aminatu's Augury as a big bomb to let us play one of each non-land card type. Curtain's Call to sneak in some creature removal in a multiplayer game. Deadly Rollick, assuming we control our commander. One with the multiverse is really good because it lets us cast a spell for free on each of our turns, but also lets us scope out the top card before a clash. Pile On, which has Convoke and lets us both surveil our top card and destroy a creature. And similarly, Price of Fame lets us cast it for cheaper if we target a legendary creature, plus has the nice Surveil 2 on it. And Rowdy Research can draw us a few cards if we're doing some heavy attacking. Now, we've been talking about tons of cards that could win us some clashes, and believe me, we're going to talk about some more, but we don't want to rely on just our commander to clash. We want even more triggers than that. So let's go over the most playable options for cards that will let us clash. First up, we've got Weed Strangle. I'm also known to take part in a Weed Strangle if you smell what I'm stepping in. This is some removal with an upside of a little bit of life gain, but admittedly, it is a single target removal for 5 mana. Still in the removal category, we have Whirlpool Whelm, returning a creature to our opponent's hand, and if we win, it goes on top of their library instead, meaning it could serve as a double whammy for winning our next clash against that opponent. In the card draw category, we have Hoarder's Greed, sort of a clashing Sign in Blood, but the upside with this one is that we get to keep clashing until we lose, meaning we could end up with tons of triggers. Research the Deep lets us draw a single card, but if we win the clash, it goes right back in our hand. On the flip side of card draw, we can make our opponents discard with Pulling Teeth, and I think we can just take a moment to pause here and remember how awesome but simultaneously putrid the art was from Lorwyn. As a piece of recursion, we can revive the Fallen, which goes back to our hand if we can manage to win the clash. Captivating Glance is an enchantment that will let us take control of a creature on our end step if we win the clash, but the nice thing about this one is it might proc a few times before that creature goes away. And finally, we have some counterspells in the form of Broken Ambitions and Scattering Stroke. So those being the most playable clash cards, we don't have a ton of options, and you might not want to play some of those cards because maybe they don't fit your theme you're going for. So instead, we can use clones or other doubling effects on our commander to hopefully get some more of those triggers off and get clashing. Clones are also going to be awesome to double up on some big monsters we can cheat out. Let's start out with taking a look at some that can target legendary creatures without having to sacrifice one of them. So we have Auton Soldier, either Sakashima of 1,000 Faces or the Imposter, Irenicus's Vile Duplication, Quantum Misalignment, Spark Double, and Storm of Saruman. And if you want some cool clones to copy your other stuff, I would recommend Astral Dragon. I think this card is super cool, and no matter what I'm playing it in this deck. Case of the Shifting Visage is good because it can also help us fix the top card of our deck. Glasspool Mimic has the advantage of also being a land in a time of need. And Sakashima's Protege has Cascade if we want to double up on the advantage of getting to cast it for free. And as a trigger doubler, we could also play Roaming Throne as a doubler for our commander, or we can name a sea creature type and build our deck more around the sea creatures, or we could go with the classic Strionic Resonator. Okay, I don't really want to talk about ramp a whole lot in this deck, but I would say to try and play like 10-11 pieces of ramp and have them span differing amounts of mana cost. I'm going to throw a bunch of suggestions up on screen right now, but you will see I have them ranging from 1 all the way to 6. The reason I did this is because A, the bigger rocks give us bigger pushes in mana, and B, in a pinch we might end up having to clash with one of these cards. It's not ideal, but for this deck, we'll do what we can. I'm particularly excited about Sonic Screwdriver because not only does it tap for mana, but it can untap one of our bigger rocks, netting us mana. It can make a creature unblockable once we throw down some heavy hitters, and it lets us scry our top card for clashing. And speaking of controlling our top card, let's take a look at a slew of cards that do exactly that. We have our classic cantrippy stuff like Brainstorm and Ponder, as well as some islands that have similar scrying effects like Hellemark Depths, Rivendell, Castle Cantris, Moonrising Island. And if we want, we can also play Temple of Deceit and Undercity Sewers to scry and surveil those cards away. And Mortuary Mire if we want to put something from our graveyard on top instead. As some reoccurable scrying options, we have Thassa, God of the Sea, Sensei's Divining Top, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Crystal Ball, and Doom Whisperer. Doom Whisperer in particular is really good in a pinch because at the cost of our life, we can either fill our graveyard or we can just dig really deep to have the perfect card on top of our deck over and over again. Imperial Seal lets us search our library for a card and put it on top, ensuring we have exactly what we need when we need it. And if we always want to know what our top card is to ensure we're going to win before every clash, we can just play Lantern of Insight and Field of Dreams and know without a shadow of a doubt that we will win this clash. But besides clashing, what other payoffs can we have for controlling the top card? Well, Twilight Prophet can drain us a bunch of life, padding our life totals and sucking our opponents down. Since we're kind of building this deck under the assumption that we will have a higher CMC than the rest of our fellow players, Keen Duelist can net us a card and chip away at our opponent's life total. And similarly, we have Protection Racket to either draw us a bunch of extra cards, or our opponents might be losing up to like 8 life. Depending on how we're building our deck, we could also play Hitsugu and Carry for another little bomb, but it does pay off from playing Morrises and Sorceries, but that's not my version of this deck. You would have to kind of build it a little bit different. And lastly, we have one more clone, Vesuvan Drifter, who can not only let us check the top card of our library, but can become a flying clone of whatever's there as well. And now kids, when playing Magic the Gathering, we need to always use protection. So I've got a couple of Magnum-sized cards that will do us a little bit of good. Now I think with our commander being a 1/8, playing a ton of protection might be overkill, but I would maybe throw in a Swiftfoot or a Greaves, maybe a Whisper Silk Cloak, because it can be a bit more versatile with some of our big beaters that we're going to see later. And then just a couple counterspells. But we aren't just going to play any counterspells. We're going to be playing Spell Swindle and the brand new Counterpoint, because not only do they have high CMC, but they also net us something else in return, whether that be a card here and now or a bunch of treasures later on. Okay, here we are. Call me the Manhattan Project, because for the remainder of this video, we're going to be talking about bombs.
Skip it up and down up.
I'm going to separate them into 2 sections. We're going to talk about sea creatures, which you could just go and build this entire deck around sea creatures if you wanted to. There are a bunch of big, awesome ones that would work great here. And then I'm also just going to talk about some not so wet, nasty bombs that will bring us the much needed W. So, sea creatures. Let's start with Brynlin, the Mooncrake, and Hullbreaker Horror. The nice thing about these two is not only are they big and beefy, but they help us control the board by returning threats to their owner's hands. Tromokratis and Rexiel the Risen Deep are just hard to block, and in the case of Rexiel, has a huge payoff when we land a hit. And Serpent of the Yawning Depths makes all of our creatures really hard to block. Nezahal is a big sea boy that is just straight up hard to deal with and can draw us a few cards along the way. Spawning Kraken can make us even more sea creatures if we go hard into the sea theme. Also, if you're heavy in that theme, we can play Engulf the Shore and Whelming Wave as flavor wins and pretty solid board wipes. And lastly, let's talk about Crothis, Lord of the Deep, who would make a really cool commander on his own, actually. He starts as a small flyer who lets us put a creature card from our graveyard on top of our library, which we've already seen is pretty relevant here. Then, if we reveal a creature from the top of our library on our upkeep that has a CMC of 6 or greater, we flip him. And on the flip side of him is a slightly bigger flyer that lets us clone our attackers, and in the case of Krakens, Leviathans, Octopuses, and Serpents, doubly so. So that covers our sea monsters. So now let's take a look at our dirt monsters, ground monsters, air monsters. Toxrill is kind of a dirt monster, little wormy slug guy. He's big and does lots on his own to slowly suppress the board, but we may require a theme that suits him a little more. Ancient Brass Dragon and Ancient Silver Dragon are both just advantage monsters. If we want to either get some creatures back from our graveyard or tons more cards in our hand, whip out that D20 and get rolling. Archfiend of Despair can suddenly put our opponents into kill range if they aren't careful. And if we pair it with another awesome card, Shard of the Nightbringer, we might just be able to dome someone for their entire life total, no matter what they're sitting at. Mindless Leech Mass lets us cast cards from our opponent's hand on a successful hit, and Cityscape Leveler lets us blow up their permanents. If you're into taking your opponent's stuff, Breach the Multiverse is a fun one, and in added features, it turns all of our creatures Phyrexian. And some last classically good cards, Consecrated Sphinx is a reliable big air beater that'll draw us a ton of cards, and the Platinum Empyrean keeps our life total right where it is. And Ugin, because he's big and majestic and I like him, don't at me. Holy Octo Dagger, I can't believe we're here. Before you click away, if you like this video, please click that like button and consider subscribing. I had a ton of fun building this deck and researching the cards, but as always, I'm sure there's tons of cool cards I missed, maybe even some stuff I got wrong, so be sure to tell me in the comments below. I'll be putting the link to both the uncut and the cut versions of this deck in the description below if you want to go take a look for yourself and see what actually made the cut. I've been enjoying making these deck techs a lot lately, so please let me know what you'd like to see in the future. I like the spicy, weird ones, so comment what you'd like to see next time. But this has been my Marvo Deep Operative deck tech. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this. This has been Commander in General, and I will see you next time. Peace.